Hi, I'm Bill Dean here at LBMC Information Security. Thank you for joining us again. We hope you enjoy this content as much as you've enjoyed the previous content. As in the past, we again have a special guest on. For this episode, Nancy Spizzo is with us again. She's a senior manager in our HITRUST practice, and she's definitely has some great information for us today. But before we actually get into the meat of the topic, which is going to be the new HITRUST guide that's coming out, I want to first thank you, Nancy, for your time. Kind of describing some of these things and giving us some of your experience. If you don't mind, for those that may not have heard you in the past, you care to give a quick introduction?
Hi, Bill. Thanks for welcoming me back. I appreciate the time to come in and spend time with our podcast followers. Some of the current topics with HITRUST. As you mentioned, I'm a senior manager here in LBMC's Information Security practice, and mainly specialize in HITRUST, as I've been doing for about the past 10 or 11 years now. So, again, thanks for welcoming me back.
Sure. Well, we're definitely glad that you're here. So I guess let's go ahead and get right to it. So let's start talking about the new release of the release of the upcoming HITRUST guide.
Yeah, sure, Bill. I'm going to hopefully not cough and annoy everyone through this. I'm struggling with some allergies, so apologize if that happens ahead of time. But yes, we are excited that LBMC is getting ready to release our fall 2020 High Trust Guide. It'll be available on our website soon, if not already, to those that are listening. We're really excited about it. It covers everything soup to nuts about high trust, and we're going to be highlighting some of those areas with you, hopefully, over the next couple of months.
That's great. And I did take a look at one of the drafts. I don't know that I've told you or not, but I did take a look at it.
Okay.
Something I picked up on was that it seemed like some organizations just continue to struggle with scoping, not only with HITRUST, but with PCI and with other types of compliance requirements specific to HITRUST. Why do you think there's such a struggle around scoping?
Scoping is just hard. And you'll hear people say that throughout the industry. High trust scoping is hard. And over the years, I've kind of built my own little hypothesis about why that happens. And what I've come to is that we are so used to in IT, security, internal audit, scoping a compliance exam or an internal audit or an audit, and we go to work. We know what department we're dealing with, we know which group of people we're working with, we know what our business unit is, and we flex into those different areas when we do our audits. When we talk about a high trust scope, I think what happens is there is two different components of the scope. And sometimes if you're not thinking about both pieces, it can be hard. And what I mean by that is there is a tool component where you go scope and apply your scoping material to generate what's called a high trust object. And those, I call them levers or components of organizational, technical, and regulatory factors come together to generate a list of compliance questions. But the work you have to do before that is what makes scoping difficult.
Yeah, I can definitely relate. And to be honest, I have more experience on the PCI side, but many times it's not extremely difficult. The credit cards are in this network; they're on these systems, and that makes the scoping kind of easy. But there's sometimes that it's not so simple, and that's when we start having discussions on trying to narrow the scope. So, what does that look like from a high trust perspective when we're looking to narrow the scope?
Well, narrowing the scope is the optimal outcome. But when you start scoping, there are rules and then there are layers of rules as you go into each component. And again, building on that complexity of what makes a high trust scope complex. So, one of the rules is that high trust does not certify an application wherever it sits, however it sits, and wherever it goes. It scopes a technical environment where an application sits. So, as you think about narrowing your scope, there are certain components of that narrowed scope that help you decide what needs to be in scope. Now, that gets to be kind of this round robin discussion. And so I usually tell people, plan on about 3 iterations of scope because what you start out with may not be what you finish with. When you start with what were the drivers of your scope, it could have been there was a contract obligation, you have a compliance obligation, you may have reporting needs, and those may be individualized by your customers, or it may be that you need one report that represents your entire business. But at some point, there's a driver that's driving that high trust scope to be completed. And I like to start with that and then build out from there into a defined set of applications, which all must be named in a high trust scope, as well as who are the users, and not that users get certified, but where do the users sit in the organization? And then you expand from there. How are your access rules set up? And then how's your technical infrastructure set up, as well as your security tools like firewalls and other network segmentation tools. And all of those different dynamics come into play into narrowing the scope as best you can.
Well, as part of your engagements with our clients, do you have scoping sessions to help them to narrow it down before the engagement actually begins? Or what do we do to help with this complexity, I guess?
Absolutely, Bill. We suggest many times, especially with a new client, that they go through some kind of readiness exam or some other kind of scoping qualification. And that's different for every client, as every client might have different needs. They have different scope platforms, they have different um, aspects to what is driving them to into the high trust compliance exam arena. So each of those things kind of play a role in how we go about evaluating the scope. But absolutely, a scope readiness exam is expected. And I have seen that go 2 and 3 iterations before.
But I'm sure there's a lot of value when we can help the client to determine the scope instead of just auditing them. So that's where we're kind of working alongside of them to ensure success for all parties.
Absolutely. There is a 90-day precursor to actually completing an exam or starting an exam where all policies, procedures, and the environment needs to be pretty stable in order to be tested. So backing that work up and knowing what that scope is important because changing it if you get into the actual exam and you realize your scope is wrong, sometimes you may have a real problem on your hands because your assessment work may not be in a state where you're able to submit it for certification or validation.
I could imagine. And while I do not have any direct experience with iTrust, I mean, I can recall when it started, and I've been around it quite a bit. Be
Hmm.
honest, you've probably done more assessments and have been doing it longer than anyone I know in my career. So, I guess with that, I know you've seen a lot, good, bad, ugly. What can you describe some of the more complex scopes that you've had to kind of work with and how you help the client to get us where we needed to be?
Well, you're right about that, Bill. I think I've seen more scopes than maybe anyone other than the people at High Trust. But what I would tell you about the complexity is that every year the complexity seems to be a little bit more complex because over the past 11, 12 years, High Trust has added on different regulatory factors. They've added in different dynamics to the scoping process to help better refine it and help organizations narrow their scopes into what's really important and also provide that key benefit, which is once I've audited that that com- that environment, the outcome in that report is highly valuable to anyone who reads it. So the complexity and scope, though, over the years has actually retained the same. Even you'd think you'd get better at it and no, but that's part of the beauty of high trust is that it's adapted to the marketplace over time. What's great about the most, those that would have a more complex scope, which is kind of what you're asking me, is how complex can it get? You know, I think the number of records that an organization holds certainly adds a high value, has a high amount of risk to it. The number of and types of users that log into a certain environment or use those environments adds a certain complexity. And by that, I mean, you might have multiple departments, you might have multiple business units, and you might even have customers that are using your environments, in which case those environments become even more complex because the back end databases, applications are segmented or segregated across your network and infrastructure. So as you grow those complexities in size of organization, the scopes just naturally increase. And that can be what adds complexity to the environment. Another complexity is that regulatory factors add complexity to the environment. So I usually find that those organizations that really need to convey compliance to some of the more complex privacy laws add to complexity in a high trust assessment as well. And all of those things have meaning, and their audiences of those reports highly value that information. So the work that goes into those complex environments is equal to its output and report.
Well, and I was definitely going to ask about the regulatory factor, so I appreciate you asking that. Um, Also, as I was looking and preparing for this and looking over the draft, it looks like you have a number of items defined in that. Would it be possible that maybe you come back sometime in the future and talk specifically to those? I like to keep us between 12 and 15 minutes on the podcast, but would love to have you back if you'd like to kind of, discuss those items specifically.
Absolutely, Bill. Again, just the entire high trust ecosystem has so many topics to learn and know about. So, yet happy to come back and share my knowledge and excitement for the program anytime.
Yeah, and I'm sure the listeners enjoy it. I'm actually kind of selfish. I like to have you on because then I have an opportunity to learn more about high trust, which I should probably know about. Just, I guess, to kind of wrap things up,
Sure.
care to provide the listeners with maybe some key success factors, based on scoping and regulatory, just the stuff that we've talked about on today's podcast.
Absolutely, Bill. That's probably a whole topic in and of itself as well. We, in our high trust guide, define a few pages of success factors, from things that happen in the very early stages of the process all the way through the end. So I think just getting scoping right and making sure that you spend the time in that area is probably the most important success factor to a project I can think of.
Great. Thank you. And again, thank you for your time. I hope the allergy season where you're at isn't as bad as what it is here in East Tennessee, as you can probably tell by my voice. I'm struggling with
Absolutely.
it also. So, to the audience, again, thank you for your time. Tune into the next episode. Nancy will be back on numerous times. Everyone, really loves to hear the insight and the experience that she has. But in the meantime, if you have a particular topic that you'd like to hear, please contact me at bdean@lbmc.com. To learn more about LBMC Security and the services we provide, please visit lbmcsecurity.com and have a great day. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill.